founder of MAP International, was a member of St. Simon's Rotary Club. He was a Rotarian already. So
when they moved,
he was a true scholar, true gentleman. And I used to be young, you know, in those days. I used to look up to this man. They're all men, okay, with jaw-dropping, you know, awe. And I used to think, man, one day I like to be like these guys.
You will hear a lot about him today in our tour.
And so after his wife's health, then he was not feeling good, and so he left. But before that, Sharon Bolin, she used to be working with him. I forgot if she came with him also from North. Anyway, she was the first member of St. Simon's Rotary.
First
woman member. So we got a lot of history.
A lot of history. Welcome. So glad you guys are here. And the tour is going to be covering some things that some of you may already know, and some may be new to others. And we'll be talking through the history of MAP, but also the culture of MAP. So when we designed this, we'll get a sense for who MAP is today, as well as what's brought us up to today. So to kick us off here, I'd like to introduce you to the MAP diaspora. So if you're not familiar with where all we serve, these red dots represent where we are across the globe. So we are in and around 80 to 100 countries annually. I think last year was 83, 84. We've been as high as 104 since I've been with MAP in 2018. And this represents both our large volume and small volume partners. If you're not familiar, we send shipments, massive sea containers, 40-foot sea containers on barges, just like the one that got caught in the Suez Canal this past year. That's what we ship in a lot of the time. But we also ship as many as one small box for mission teams. So this is representative of both. I would say our vast volume is overweight by these large volume partners that are in and on the ground 365 days a year, and we're supporting their missions on the ground, and we'll talk about that partner model through our tour, but also with church mission teams and medical mission teams when they need much smaller orders as well. So we equip both. You also are going to be getting an introduction to our values, and the first of which you see here. They lead with MAP because this is a verb as well as our name. So we look to map our values through the work that we do. That passion being the first one, and each of these values is demonstrated in an area where activity demonstrates that value. So this is our chapel. This is where we worship together, where we pray together, where we gather and do business meetings together. And each of these values also has a scripture verse attached, which for this is Matthew 25:36, which orders the work that we do. So you'll see 4 more of those around the building. Jason, I keep saying that I'm going to have bingo cards for our tours so that people can start adding as they start to see the different values and such. We're going to continue on this way when we do, and we order that through what we call our 3 pillars. So in disease, in disaster, and in despair. And these 3 pillars are receiving a bit of a marketing facelift right now. So the taglines and the images are going to change slightly, so the website's going to be the more updated version of these. But what this tells us is when it's appropriate for us to go into action. When is it appropriate for MAP to be responding? So any one of the red dots that you saw on the map around the corner would represent at least one of these. In the cases such as clean, it represents all 3. So sometimes it represents more than one, but we believe that it's important for us to ensure that we follow our 3 pillars as we go into the field.
May I ask a stupid question?
Of course you can.
Would you define for me, from my memory, the acronym MAP?
Medical Assistance Programs. So that's where it originated, and we will certainly talk about that on our first stop on the history tour.
Yes.
I'll be sure.
This is a tight corridor here, and we'll stop by this first tower here. So, activating how to represent trust. This project was kicked off in 2018, and this was one of those that we felt like was fully representative of our history of MAP. That the reason people trust MAP is because we have been doing this a long time, and we have walked the walk and followed through on that action. And that trust is carried forward with our board of directors. So this is a picture from September of 2019. So a couple faces have changed, but still the chairman of the board is Jim Barfoot, and you all know Steve Sterling, I'm sure, quite well. And the other 15 members of the board are behind them. So one thing I like to draw attention to is the diversity on the panel. And I don't simply mean by ethnic
and geographic diversity. There's diversity of skill set, of gender, of age, and especially of industry. So we've got representative from manufacturing, pharmaceutical manufacturing, pharmacists, we have doctors, we have lawyers, we have financial advisors, we have HR professionals, we have people from the CDC, quite a few different backgrounds, as well as nonprofit professionals and pastors. So when Steve goes to the board for advice and guidance and direction, he's receiving quite a few different voices. And as we all well know, as we've been in business, that trickles down to the work that I do here internally. It makes my job as HR director much, much easier as I look for diversity and voices in our set here, our employees. So I love to be able to show that off. And then you'll note our MAP trust value is based in Scripture, Titus 2:7. And what we're about to take is what we call our trust walk. So this is the history that has built the trust for MAP. And each of these panels represents a decade of MAP. So these are the years of MAP. So we'll talk about each one of these. And the artifacts that you see around each history panel are things that are associated with the region that we did work in, or the specific time period and action that occurred. So feel free to linger back and read through the panels, because I'm not going to sit here and read to you. I'll be hitting the 4 is when the work of MAP began. So we were not yet an organization. We were a part of Christian Medical Society. Ray Knighton was an employee of Christian Medical Society, and he got a call from Eli Lilly, the company. And they said, we have a shipment of medicines. Could you use it? The reason they called Ray Knighton is he was well known to have a network of missionaries across the globe that were doing medical missions in the field. And what Eli Lilly knew is those people would be trustworthy, they would be using those medicines ethically and responsibly, and that they could trust Ray to get those to those individuals. And thus the partner model was born. And that is what we still use to this day. And so Ray said, sure, I would love to receive that shipment of medicines. What he did not realize, it was going to be an 18-wheeler full of medicines. The way I first heard the story is the way I continue to tell it. It's not the way it is in the book, but I heard it showed up to his front doorstep. And Beth received, his wife received the 18-wheeler and said, what have you done? In the book, it's recounted as showing up to the office and spilling it out of the office ways and into the hallways. And the sense of urgency took over him, saying, what am I going to do? And so we all know that's the mother of invention. And so he figured out how to create the pathway to get these medicines out. And so the work was done so well that that created demand and need. And medical assistance program was born inside of Christian Medical Society. So that was in the early decade that happened. And in 1965, it became so large that they spun off into their own organization and became MAP International. And so over the years, we've dropped the use of the acronym, but it was early used as Medical Assistance Program. But since we're not a program, so to speak, we're an organization now, we largely just use MAP as our name. And here it's worth calling attention that we certainly have been present in most of the world's biggest events throughout history, especially disaster, despair type events. Typhoon Gloria was certainly one in Taiwan, and you can see some of the artifacts here that can be associated back to that region. And in Afghanistan, this is one of a pair of ceremonial robes that was gifted to Ray Knighton here in this image by the King of Afghanistan for the work that he did in that region during this time frame. So feel free to read their work. They instituted their first headquarters in Wheaton, Illinois. So when Hamsa talks about up north, that's where he was.
Oh, that's where he was.
Outside of Chicago. And so that was his and Beth's home. And so they birthed the organization there. And in this decade of MAP, Ray realized that he would need to continue that network. So the ones that I said that he reached out to all these missionaries and sent all the medicines to, that network. Because it was not going to be as simple as saying, new packaging, same great product. He was going to have to transfer that relationship to this new organization. So the way he did that is he went to the continent of Africa, and over the course of 6 months, traveled over 26,000 miles, what they called the Tour of Champions, and reinstituted those relationships. Many of those organizations are still partnering with MAP today. So that's how successful he was. And so really made MAP a household name for organizations like ours. So we're still working on the Brunswick area, but if you're in medical assistance community, they knew who MAP was. We also had several key relationships where we started with Reader's Digest, a fellowship program. That Hamsa, are you familiar with the MAP fellowship program? No, you were not. Okay. So fourth-year medical students receive funding from MAP to go on a medical mission. So that's one way. Yes.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, we had a program about that.
I thought that you might. Yeah. So one of our directors, our board of directors actually, who works at the CDC, was a MAP fellow, one of the earliest ones. And Reader's Digest funded that fellowship program, and so that continues to today, and goes through ups and downs, but is still in continuity. We also began a relationship with U.S.A. that continued for several decades to follow. So all of these key partnerships really instituted MAP as an organization to trust. And so all of this was burgeoning in this first decade of MAP as its own organization, and teeing us up to be able to respond to some really key events as we move to the next decades of history, not just MAP's history, but the world's history.
I need to slow down just one second. I got to wrap myself around this a little bit, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay, so we start out in Chicago
Yes.
because Eli Lilly makes a phone call. Okay, we're still growing around the world and developing these relationships.
Yes.
And along the way, the word gets out, and people like Reader's Digest, who I love, decide to start offering grant money or funding or whatever funding. And then it goes to U.S.A. and so forth, and now we're in 86 countries. Is that what I remember? You said
In
a while
86,
Oh, today?
to today, yes.
So it's grown
Yes.
from that to 86.
Yes.
Started out with the Typhoon Gloria and other things, and moves on. So, okay, I'll continue to ask questions.
Yeah.
Believe me,
Please
I ask
do.
questions.
Please do. It's a lot more fun for me.
You're a great student, man. I'm impressed.
Third decade of work into the late 70s and early 80s. What MAP was beginning to see is that the work was not just in the continent of Africa. There was a lot that was being spread into South America as well. And in fact, in the late 70s, early 80s, we opened our very first country office. I believe it was Ecuador. Was our first country office? Not Bolivia. I think it was Ecuador was our first country office. And so we started doing quite a bit of work in Central and South America. We also made key personal relationships, not just with organizations, but in this decade, you'll note that Ray Knighton traveled with Billy Graham through Guatemala and other Central American countries to also promote the work there, and was there in Guatemala City when the earthquake struck. You may remember that event, and was there when people said Billy Graham's speaking was so powerful that it shook the earth, is what the locals said about Reverend Graham. So he was there for key events like that. He also had some very special relationships that helped MAP as well, such as Surgeon General Dr. Sierra Coop was a close personal friend to Ray and also became one of our board of directors later years.
By the way, if I may interrupt, Ray looked quite similar to the Surgeon General, you know. They could be twins little.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Physically.
There are some interesting pictures that
Pictures
didn't
you should
quite
see,
make it to the wall of Sierra
have it.
and Ray together. Now he didn't have the same beard.
Yeah.
Dr. Coop had a very distinctive beard.
Okay, go back.
Absolutely. And so the work was expanding and it was getting very, very large. And they were discovering that headquarters in Chicago was quite a ways on land to ship to get to the point of the coast of getting it anywhere in Central South America or Africa. So they began to look for a different spot for the headquarters to land. And I'm sure they looked at quite a few areas, but Brunswick, low cost and close to 3 deep sea ports, Charleston, Savannah, and Jacksonville. And so that helped us land here, but this property was not our first spot. We actually were in the Gulfstream building before it was Gulfstream. So post-Navy, pre-Gulfstream, it was MAP International. Then we built the facility across the street from there, and we're there for probably 20 or more years. But then we were...
times there, Rotary Club, you know, with
Yes.
the old facility.
Yes, and there we have quite a few employees that started their career with MAP in that building. And worked with Ray in that building. So we have this special nature of quite a few employees remembering the founder. And so they started there, and then we were approached by FLETC, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center here next door, about that property because it was adjacent to theirs. They purchased it from us, and we built this property about 11 years ago.
2008, I think we did the construction. Yeah.
Construction,
Right,
and then
yep.
moved in 2009. So maybe going on 12 years ago now. So that's what has led us to here today. And here's an image of the groundbreaking at the first facility
So when
down the way.
When did Ray move here? I forgot the year to Brunswick.
It was in 1985.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was president of the club in 83, 84, you know.
Oh, okay. How about that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've been president of a couple.
For Rotarians in their professional careers, they used to have four-way test on the desks and on the walls.
Yeah.
And he was one of the Rotarians that embodied that spirit. There are a whole bunch of them like that in our club, you know. I was blessed to learn from them, observe them.
You will. All right, so I'm going to go a little faster so you guys can see the really cool stuff with Jason. But here you'll see our collaboration area. This represents an activity where it brings a lot of employees here into the same central area. It was represented by Ephesians 4:16, as well as math accountability. We update the screen on the wall once a month as new numbers come out. So we share with God and everyone where we are in relation to our goals. Trying to demonstrate both to our employees as well as our visitors that we don't hide behind our numbers, that we do what we say we're going to do. So keep in mind our fiscal year runs from October to September, so we're in our fourth quarter at this point. But that demonstrates both, you'll see people served circling back around as we move through this area.
So is that annual revenues or is that aggregate?
Mm-hmm. So not net. Keep in mind that's not representing the preference. It's gross. So it's going up, not down, certainly. And I'm feeling that from my role. All right, as we go into the next decade of work, this is where the global stage really takes place. We start to see several key things happening in the 80s and the 90s that you all well remember. The AIDS epidemic was rampant in Africa. As you remember, we have quite a partnership and quite a few relationships there. So they were leaning on us heavily for that. And in fact, we had then expanding country offices. So we started in Ecuador and in South and Central America with country offices and began expanding those in this time frame as well throughout the continent of Africa. So we also had a community presence in addition to a partner relationship presence. And so we were doing a lot more community work and not just the acquisition and distribution that we're known for. And during that time frame, we wrote and produced community health kits on how to address the AIDS epidemic. So this was written by MAP staff, and it was transmitted throughout communities in Africa about how to dispel the myths around the AIDS epidemic. As you remember, that was quite a big issue about you don't get it by a handshake, you know. Yeah, so, and it is so reminiscent of work and books that were done in the 80s. So I just love flipping through it, especially the images are so indicative of that time. But that's just a piece of the kit. So there was a massive kit box that we didn't have space to display here. But this is just a piece of that health kit that was used. So that was one key thing that was happening during the 80s and the 90s, and also the fall of the USSR. So as the government went, so did the infrastructure for the healthcare system, and so their ability to get basic medicines disappeared. And so at that time, we were doing quite a bit in that area. You see quite a few things here from Romania and other Eastern European countries. And you'll note here in 1991 where we had quite a bit of work going on in Eastern Europe, in Albania, Armenia, Bulgaria, etc. We also celebrated our 50th year of service during this time frame. Yeah. Jason. So on into the 90s, we began to expand our country offices even further. I think we got up to somewhere around, I always forget this number, 13 to 14 country offices, mostly in the Central and South American countries as well as the continent of Africa. I think we had one briefly in Indonesia, I do believe. But they were starting to take this tack of programs, not products. The thought of medicines feels like a Band-Aid to the problem. And when you're standing in a country and you see all these other issues, maybe we need to look at this more holistically. Maybe this needs to be a better approach where we wrap around it and not simply put a Band-Aid on the problem. What we will discover is that was actually mission creep happening. And if you're familiar with that term or not, what that means is you're standing in this space helping the people around you. And as you help them, you're stepping closer to where they are. And then you see another need on the other side of them. And then you want to creep a little closer to addressing that problem. And before you know it, you're 20 feet away from where you began. And so what we realized later in MAP's history is that was mission creep, and I'll shed some more light on that at the next panel. But here we also began getting recognized by our local and state governments for the work that we were doing. October was proclaimed as MAP International Month by the state of Georgia and the city of Brunswick, so we're just going to own that, even if it was for a specific year. But also during this time frame, we had some other key partnerships that brought us into this century, where we were working with the Carter Center and started working with them. I believe it was on their eradication of guinea worm. We partnered with them in that work, and we still work with them to today. We have a partnership with them in Liberia, where we do psychotropic medicines for mental health. This is also the decade that our founder, Ray Knighton, passed. He was survived by his wife, Beth, for quite a few years, and she did not pass until the next decade. But we lost him here. And we also, during this time frame, I skipped over it, but in the previous decade, we had started what was called the International Conference on Medical Missionaries, the ICMM conference, and it continued into this decade of work. And it was the only conference of its kind where it was medical missions coming together. So there were quite a few conferences for missionaries in general, but nothing focused specifically on the medical service. And so that was founded by MAP International, and it continues to this day, but not under our flagship. And I believe that's everything that I like to cover during this, but feel free to read through. There's a lot that I didn't touch on here. Okay, all right, and this is the last decade that we're going to cover until we get to 2025. We are going to make this our last stop, and then we'll add on to the tour as we get to that end of the next decade. But between 2006 and 2015, a number of key things were happening. So we've been recognized by groups, foundations, individuals, governments, and now we're getting recognized by the people that really rate companies. So we were getting very, very high marks in the early 2000s from companies like Forbes, Better Business Bureau, Charity Navigator, as you guys may be familiar with that organization. So we're really beginning to get acknowledged for these decades of work and the high quality nature of the work that we're doing. We also got acknowledged by the Clinton Global Initiative for the work that we did toward HIV and AIDS in Africa. So that was another acknowledgement in those early 2000 years, also in 2006. Another key thing happened in this decade. Our President and CEO, Steve Sterling, came on board in 2014. And unfortunately, he encountered an organization that was in peril. So our financials were not looking strong. The future of the organization was in question. And it was because of the Programs Not Products initiative that was launched. And what we discovered is that at our core, we had gotten away from that partner model that was instituted all those years ago. Our DNA was acquisition and distribution, not in community work. There are a number of wonderful organizations that do that very, very admirable work, and Steve identified that our calling is to equip them, not to necessarily replicate the work that they're doing on the ground. So we need to enable them to do their work and step back, and that was a very, very controversial decision because there's a lot of heart and connection to that community work and that country work. He lost some board members over the decision, but what has borne out from that decision is that our financials within a year were in the black, and we have not gone back into the red since Steve has been on board, and we have never been in better financial standing as we are today. And so in a short 7 years later, it is really borne out that that was the right decision. The way he went about that is he worked to equip those country offices to transition into their own NGOs, to have local ownership and local direction from board and out of the MAC flagship. So in many instances, they became their own organization and continue the work in that community, and several of them are partners to MAP now. So they just no longer fly the MAP flag. So that is what brings us up to MAP International today. Any questions there?
Might make a note that on an annual basis in Charity Navigator, MAP and Rotary Foundation Go back and forth 1-2.
Mm-hmm.
1-2, 1-2.
Wow,
They're
I did not know
there
that.
every year.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And
Who's Timmy?
Timmy
T-I-M-M-Y or
T-I-M-M-Y.
Okay, good.
And I'm going to turn this over to, he runs the whole show back here, the distribution
Holy
center, everything
shit.
coming out, going, all
It's
that.
just like Costco.
Yeah. Well, you have your membership card.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
Well, Jason's done this so much now, he can do it himself, yeah. But we have a 40,000 square foot facility. MAP is considered a Georgia wholesaler, so we're considered a Georgia pharmacy. So we're up under the pharmacy regulations to do that. So this is how we're able to handle prescription medications. This is our volunteer center. Usually we don't have product sitting in there. We have a assembly lines, and this is where we do our pre-packs. We'll bring in volunteers from the community. I've been here several times. With volunteering for us. This is kind of a sample that Jason himself made up for us. This is for, we call these our mission packs for U.S. physicians or U.S. missionaries that's going overseas. So we have a OTC, a over-the-counter pack that we can build. We have certain therapeutic classes in there, analgesics, rehydration salts, multivitamins. Then we have a RX pack, handles prescription medications because we have the eligibility process. So to handle prescription medications, to transfer that, we have to have a doctor's signature to transfer these medications to do that. So that's why we have the different packs, but we have volunteers come in, they pack this for us, and we're able to send that out here in the U.S., and then they hand carry that mostly overseas. But of course, the last couple.
Narcotics? Do you have a narcotics such as OxyContin or morphine or stuff like that?
We are DEA controlled. We have DEA, but we don't handle those type of narcotics just because they're so hard to import into other countries. But we do have a DEA room upstairs, separate security. The DEA comes in, does their inspections. The Georgia Narcotics also come in and conducts their inspections for us. And also, we are also a foreign trade zone. So we're able to bring in international, non-FDA approved medications, but with U.S. Customs, we have to prove they're going back internationally, so we can't ship those to the U.S.
Is that because Brunswick's a trade zone?
We work with the Development Authority.
Okay.
We're up under their umbrella. So they knew the need that we had, so they worked with us so they could make our facility a foreign trade zone to do that. But we are up under the Development Authority's umbrella to do that. So.
Maybe if I can add real quick. This area back here is our volunteer kitting center. So usually there are no pallets stacked in here. Usually we have the assembly line tables lined up, and we have 200 and something, don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but volunteers, mostly local, that come in, and a lot of them are familiar faces, Rotarians, that's why I was telling people, who's going to come down. I'm like, oh, you see them at volunteer packs and all that stuff. But we bring them in, and they come in and pack these medicines. They pack our hygiene kits, things like that. So usually this is set up like that. But as you'll see, we've got a lot of it moved out right now. And Timmy will talk about this, but we have 3 other warehouses right now. So over the last couple of months, it's been stuff lined up down the aisles, and this area you have to kind of walk through like this. So we had to break all that.
Pictures, with that.
Yeah.
Because
Like
you haven't been
Beverly
able to
did-
ship
I'm sure
out
Beverly did
during
packing
COVID?
too.
Several reasons. One, there has been a logistics backlog globally with the containers and all that. And as she was mentioning, I think we said 85% of our product goes out in large volume. So that's 40-foot containers, 40 pallets, and that adds up quickly when you have all these little red scribbly notes. That's updated every day with all the orders that are going out. Believe it or not, we have impressive computer systems, but that's what works for our guys. So, but no. So the other thing is we've had some major donations in the past 6 months, maybe. Yeah, some of them have been in excess of 1,000 pallets. I mean, just major donations and we can only hold about 3,000 pallets in here.
300 locations.
Yeah.
What is this a pallet I'm looking at over there?
Yes.
I hate to pull out. Mama said don't pull it.
Yeah.
And who's donating all these pallets of medicine?
So we have about 76-ish, just around there. It might be last number around 75 to 80 or those corporate pharmaceutical corporations, and some of those say pharmaceuticals. Some of them are like 3M, Cardinal, Henry Schein, Walmart. We have a warehouse full of Walmart masks right now.
Are they donating because they have excess, or they donating?
Yes. So
oh,
at some
okay.
point the supply chain
I got you.
did.
Okay.
About 30 minutes ago, the supply chain caught up with the issues. And these are things that we actually, like the PPE, the mask, coveralls, N95s, goggles, we pre-position that stuff here for disaster relief regardless. So when COVID first outbroke in Wuhan last year, we were able to send, I mean, it was the last week of January we started working on it, and I think our first shipment went out February 1st, but we were able to send like 3 million masks and it was around 1 million or so pair of gloves and lots of 10,000 bodysuits, things like that. So it's all stuff that we had on hand just for our general relief.
What kind of masks? You talking about these little tissue masks, or
everything from
like
N95s
these?
to those two, but the regular N95s, face shields, things that, I mean, it was amazing that companies would contact us and say, how many do you want this year, or how many will you be able to accept, and they would do produce to give. And it went from that to, oh, that's going to cost you $4 a mask. You know? And it was like overnight, like that happened. So we had to procure some temporary other warehouses and all that. But I say all that to say, so this area here, though, is normally very organized, and it has set up for volunteer events. So next time you come, it might look like that.
So to add to that, the
Yeah.
St. Simon's Club, and I think most of the local clubs have done a number of volunteer days, and I know through COVID that became our primary outing together. They'd come over here and wear masks
Jason, tell them how
and
many
set
little
it
tiny
up.
plane rides you've taken out of here to
Oh my gosh!
Hurricane
So,
Center.
we got some funny videos of across the airport, Brunswick
Right.
Golden Isles Airport's across the street. You probably saw Gulfstream and all that. So we're able to land good-sized planes in here. What ends up happening during, like Puerto Rico is a great example of Hurricane Michael, Hurricane Florence, Hurricane Dorian, specifically hurricanes. In the southeast, there's the Soul Relief, which is based out of St. Petersburg, I believe, and it's a network of kind of southeastern-based volunteer pilots that have their own planes. And then Operation Blessing is based out of Texas, and that's actually several hundred volunteer pilots around the U.S. And so during major disasters, and also organizations like Airlink even, but here locally, we can reach out and say, listen, we're responding to the Bahamas. And Puerto Rico is just a funny example because we landed about 9 planes across the street over a weekend, and we would, at the time, we did not have this beautiful 26-foot brand new, not yet, a brand new 26-foot F-750 out here that Terry Thomas Foundation locally partnered with us to get. We didn't have that, so but we're in South Georgia and everyone owns a truck. So that's a prerequisite to work at MAP. But so our guys would load up the trucks, pallet at a time, drive across the street. We would break the pallets apart, and these were not cargo planes. These were, some of these were 2-passenger prop jets. And we're putting thousands of hygiene kits, breaking them out of the boxes, stuffing them in they're flying like this to Puerto Rico with these things. But quick funny story, we loaded a jet. I mean, it was a private jet, maybe 8 passengers or so, and it was hot. It was, I think, late July or something, I forget when, but it was hot, and it was humid, and that plane was not air conditioned when we were on it. They had turned it off, whatever. We get everything, the plane about full, and the little Hispanic pilot comes over, and he was like, "Where's the cargo net?" I was like, "What cargo net?" He was like, "The one that was on the very back seat." And I was like, so we had to sit in our slimmest guy, like, kind of do this. Do across the top of the stuff to the fuselage and get over there and go down, get the net and pull it back across, which we still couldn't connect, but you know what? That plane went out. So, but yeah, and as he said, we respond to a lot of things.
Jason, we've been talking a lot about COVID in Puerto Rico, but explain what the hygiene kits are, and in a normal disaster, that sounds strange to say, but a normal disaster you're dealing with.
Yeah. So hygiene is a big part of disaster response and stuff we do, realizing the dignity aspect of it for one thing. We get hit with that here locally with evacuations. So I think Hurricane Matthew might have been the last, can't remember on the last, or Irma, I can't remember which one it was, the last one that we had to evacuate. But that's the reality of it, you can be hit with something and it doesn't matter how nice your home is or how nice your community is or infrastructure, you could lose everything overnight. And so when that happens and all of a sudden we have thousands of people that are in whether school gymnasiums or makeshift shelters with someone like Red Cross or churches, whatever, we use our hygiene kit program to send them the basic hygiene items like toothpaste and even deodorant, but soaps and body wash and washcloths, little first aid kits, things like that. to help to prevent the spread of disease, which obviously become very important during COVID. Another thing with that is with COVID, there was no longer, we've got a gym with 500 people. Now we have 500 people spread across 50 locations. So using our partner networks with like national volunteer organizations active in disaster, we reach out with them and say, we have this, how can we help? And we get it to them and they distribute it across the ground where it's needed. We keep about, right now I think the number might be a little higher, but we try to keep around 20,000 hygiene kits. We call them our disaster health kits because they do have the first aid kits in them. Right on top of us, usually. I think they've actually been moved mostly out of the mezzanine to one of our other offsite warehouses, but we keep them ready to go. Our volunteers come in and pack them throughout the year. So sometimes the requests are we need 1,000, sometimes the requests are we need 10,000. Depending upon the magnitude of the disaster. And that's just one part of our disaster relief program, but it's become a very key component of it. And it's also helped us to keep community members, corporations, civic organizations engaged as well, because it gives us an off-site packing opportunity for them. Where now, we can't take, if you said, can you come to Perry and pack medicines? Legally, we can't. But if you ask, if Georgia Drugs and Narcotics found out, we're just taking it to a gym over here and packing it and bringing it back. But we can do off-site packing events for the hygiene kits. So we can bring all those components, and some of them are very large. UPS Foundation in Atlanta, we've partnered at the UPS headquarters and had about 2,000 kits packed in an hour with their staff coming through. And some of them are, I remember a board member had a children's church group of about 5 kids, and they said, hey, listen, can you ship us this stuff? And we're gonna pack it in my living room as a children's church project, and they shipped it back. We can do that with the hygiene kits. So it's helped us for that external engagement we were lacking previously. So, yeah.
I have a question about the medication. You said it's excess medication. Is it expired or almost expired?
No, it's usually 7 to 8 months is the limit.
Okay.
The reason being, if we get stuck with expired medication, we are responsible for the cost of it. So the risk versus opportunity. We have a team every day that receives these offers, and they look at all of that, not just the dating, but the volume of it. What are our partners' needs, and what can we get it? If it was 6 months dated today, and the country that's going to be accepting it has a 6-month limit, then we have to factor in it's going to take us 30 days or so to actually get it here, to get it repackaged, to get it shipped. Some containers might take 30 days to get it across the ocean. So all that has to be factored in from the moment we receive it.
I'm just curious how these companies are saying this is excess. You guys can have this if we're not going to need it. I mean, are they just determining that?
A couple of reasons. There's the obvious tax side of it. It's a donation on their part.
Okay.
Then there's the corporate social responsibility aspect of it too, because we're reporting back to them, your product went to these countries. They're putting on their social media and reporting to their staff, hey, you helped us send medicines to all these. And on their part, then the benefit for them is they're not stuck with paying to destroy this product because we were able to get it to these countries.
Barcode scanning everything. This is part of the U.S.A requirements from the government, so I'm hoping we'll get ASNs, event shipment notifications coming in, then we can scan that, get it on our system, and then scan it and go back out. And hoping that's going to improve our efficiencies to do that.
Yeah, just come, please.
Purchase medications, the GIK donations, some of those date requirements. We have partners that he wants the longer data, so we do purchase, and that's part of our foreign trade zone. We're able to purchase internationally, bring it in, or bring in IEHPs, which Jason can talk about from the relief sides, but then we purchase children's antibiotics by the pallets, and we're able to bring that in, and then co-mingle that with our outgoing shipments. And then we also have what we call custom orders. These are pre-packed. We don't put medications, hypertension, diabetic medications, something that is done locally. However, most of the U.S. and like that, they want those things. So we do that as a custom order, so we pre-pack that. We double verify everything.
I think it's vitamins as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we purchase vitamins. We have, for international purposes, we had a donor 2 years ago come up and ask if we was interested in prenatal vitamins and micronutrients. We said, sure, that's a high demand. And he started donating over, I think this year it's going to be close to 2 million bottles of long-dated vitamins. So that's the difference. These are the blue wrap. So these are containers that's ready to go out. As Jason mentioned a while ago, we're having a little bit of issues with the delays in the containers and booking, so that's taking longer now than it has before.
What's the life line of containers packed up like this, how long do you have before you got to move it?
Well, we know exactly the date, the expiration date, and
Right.
we know what date and range it has to get there in country. So we've got that worked out. So a lot of these, our partners is pre-booking those. We're say we can book these now for next month on this date. This is when the vessel is shipping. So can you have our order processed by that time? We are doing. We also do air shipments.
So everyone said, let's back up. Let's actually ship them in October after we launch the new system, because we know the need for COVID's not going away for PPE and all that. So they agreed to that, and they said, well, in the immediate future, can you air freight us 4 pallets of certain PPE, like face shields, N95s, actually some stethoscopes that we had donated specifically for them from 3M. And then the other item, I think, was barrier guns. And so they asked if we could go and get that air freighted over like this week, so we're getting that out the door hopefully in the next couple of days.
So when you air freight it, where does it go to where does it go?
That depends on the shipment. This one specifically, I don't even think we have a planned.
We work with freight forwarders. Usually it goes out of Atlanta to the country.
Out of Atlanta.
That's Atlanta.
So you take it by 18-wheeler to Atlanta?
To Atlanta, yeah. We'll ship it up
Yeah,
there.
and you say 40-foot container, what is that?
Well,
What's
when
the
it,
size?
yeah,
What's the size?
okay, a
It's
20 to 40 foot
18-wheeler?
container, yeah. There's these steel boxes behind the truck. And we build our pallets, usually 40 pallets fits inside a 2-foot container. Yeah.
Okay, so is this a pallet I'm looking at?
Yes.
No, he's never been in industry.
We're trying to double stack that and wasting space inside the box.
I ran forklifts in a mill one time.
One time?
I did. I
We
used
have
to race them after
a
work.
shipment that's supposed to be going out this morning to Lebanon. It's been arranged by FedEx.
Okay.
So they're doing that with a partner. So they're they had a little trucking issue at the port this morning, so they called. It's delayed, but hoping they're going to be here before lunch.
So FedEx will take them to India? Is that what you're saying?
FedEx is taking this one to the port. This partner has worked with FedEx, and
Okay.
FedEx is donating the freight for this particular partner.
Amazing.
So that's why our responsibility is to get it to FedEx, and FedEx is taking it to their consolidation point, put it on the container, and then ship it out.
So consolidation point, I want a hypothetical example. All right, so we're leaving here, we're going to Atlanta to meet up with FedEx. FedEx is going to load all the stuff up on a plane. And we're going to take it to a consolidation point, which would be in India.
Yeah.
So you're going to fly it to India and unload it, and then people from wherever they come and pick it up, and they're going to distribute it to the villages.
Yes.
Did I get that right?
Yes.
No paperwork involved whatsoever. That was a perfect summary. That was the.
Yeah, he gets A plus all the way
All the way through, yeah. Like, give me a quiz. So
Interesting.
You can see a part of our. You see the red wrap.
Okay.
Now, foreign trade zone, because of our U.S. customs regulations, we're not able to do that process. We have to share with U.S. Customs what vessel is it going on, what airplane is it going on, because we have to make sure is transiting bond to that plane, and then it changes bond from that to the airline or to the cargo ship, and then it's in bond.
They're going to inspect it as such when
They
it
can
arrives.
inspect it as yeah. So then we can come show it to him. We can give him our inventory records. And
Tremendous education for me too. I never had these in-depth discussions
Nigeria.
because we didn't have it before.
you can see we've got shipments going to Armenia. We've got some going to Nigeria, Haiti, And of course, every time, working internationally, of course, as you know, the Haitian president just got assassinated. So that can cause that interruption in supply chain. So that causes a lot of changes and scrambling to make sure we can rearrange the shipment someplace else. But now they're opening up the ports and we're able to get those in.
I didn't study the map, but did you go to Cuba?
Of course, Cuba is U.S. sanctioned.
Right.
So the partners have to have the proper government license, the DIS license. But if they have the license, we're able to ship to Cuba to do that. So we have a partner we're currently working with ship to that. And that's kind of the way it goes with the political things. Sometimes they loosen that. A lot of times on the humanitarian aid, they'll offer those licenses and no issues, and we're able then to ship.
One more question.
Yeah.
This pallet that I'm staring at, 803.
That's 803 payments. Yes, sir.
The pallet numbers, obviously they are ID number. How many people will that pallet serve? Approximately.
That particular pallet, just looking at it, is a pallet of prenatal. So there's probably 3,000 bottles of 180 tabs on that particular thing. So you can say it's one of those interpretations. Does that serve 3,000 or does it serve 6,000 because it serves the woman and the baby? Mm-hmm. We say 3,000. We stay conservative. But every and this is ongoing. As we say, we get the donations in, we bring them in, and then we have a team that's working with the hospitals and the clinics and countries and the partners. We offer them, here's what we have, here's what you need, here's what we have available. We then match that up. After everyone's agreed to that, then we send it out here and it's pick and pack. So we just say we don't ship anything that hasn't been approved in the field.
I want to deep dive this one more step.
Absolutely.
Nigeria, 3,000 patients.
Yes.
All right, I see a whole bunch of these that say Nigeria.
That's kind of a
So what's the need
40
factor? I mean, what are we talking about? 15,000 people, 100,000 people ultimately, or what are we?
And that's exactly what our rep dealing with that partner in that country is dealing with.
Okay.
That's exactly trying to say, what's your demand? Because we're saying the demand is greater, so we're trying to get that information, communicate that back to our farm code donors, so they would also continue to donate pharmaceuticals for us.
All right, now let me rewind it, reel it back in.
Yes.
How much does that package worth? How much is that pallet worth in U.S. dollars?
We assign values as far as WAC value, wholesale acquisition cost. Currently, we probably have $200 million worth in-house. We usually ship out, we've been averaging probably 600 to 700 million per year, fiscal year type things. So a pallet of vitamins could be $7 a bottle, where you can get another bottle of hypertension that could be very expensive. Right. And that's why, but we do track that for reporting purposes by WAC value, which we get that from the what is called the Red Book, or the first data bank source to do that. Purchase product, we do that strictly as cost of goods. What we bought it at is our value.
So since we're filming this and it may be publicly shown, let's talk about security for a moment.
Yeah, good
We
point.
have, since it's being video, we have armed guards at every corner of the building with a, yeah, we do have, we have a security is our zone. Even as you see, we have card access, so only certain employees can get in. And of course, every time you're swiping the card, it's tracking that, so we're able to see who's entered the DC and what time. Then we have the physical keys that only a certain staff can enter after hours. But then we have video cameras on every egress door. We have also then just the alarm system, so it's armed. So alarm goes off 2 o'clock in the morning. They give us a call. Do you want us to send the police or not?
And you have you mentioned earlier that the customs officer has helped you with security as well.
Yes.
And the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center is next door.
Yeah, well, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center has a program that they send their students down to train. I mean, so they go through, they ask all their security questions about computer securities, mail openings, and then they'll do a walk around, and then they'll come back and give us recommendations on, hey, we saw this possible flaw. Knowing that federal buildings and nonprofits may be a little difference, but it's still a major issue. even the Farm Code donors sends their securities team down to us and does inspections. So they'll come down and do an audit for the product they donated to us to make sure we're receiving everything and we're shipping everything that matches. But then they also go through and they check our securities just to make sure.
Which leads me to ask another question.
Yep.
With this federal training facility next door, which also trains narcotics, et cetera, do you have canines walking through here from time to time?
We haven't in probably 4 or 5 years.
Would
but
that
it
be a
is-
good training opportunity?
Absolutely, yes. That's anything they do, we try to help them out. I mean, so, and because we're helping them out, they're helping us out at the same time. So it's